Why digital transformations fail, how Rolling Stone is suing Google over AI overviews, and what smart leaders know about AI success. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 241 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, and welcome to episode 241 of Transformation Ground Control. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy aspects of change. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we're an independent tech agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And joining me, as always, is Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for joining again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you here. We've got a great show. It's going to be fun. We're going to talk about some opening social media questions. We'll get into some newsworthy topics related to just the news today. We'll talk about, in specific, we'll get into how Google is getting sued over its AI overviews. By Rolling Stone, they're getting sued. And then we'll talk about how Microsoft and OpenAI have signed or have agreed to a non-binding deal. And then later in the show, we're going to dive into some root causes and case studies of why digital transformations fail. So we'll get into, I think, 4 or 5 different case studies from my new book called Welcome to the Jungle, which you can find on Amazon, and you can also find it via the links below. So be sure to order that. You can use the links below to find that. But we're going to talk about some of the use cases or case studies from the book. We'll also talk about some of the lessons from the book, just to give you a teaser or a flavor of what you can find in that book. And then later, after that discussion, we are going to get into what smart leaders know about AI. So we've got a lot to cover here today. But before we get into some of our other topics, what are some of the social media questions we've received here recently, Darian?
Yeah, so this first question today is, how could GLAPAR be considered obsolete when enterprises are still relying on ERP apps like inventory control, receivables, and payroll processing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And if you're not familiar with that acronym, it's GL is General Ledger, AP is Accounts Payable, AR is Accounts Receivable. So it's the 3 of the core functions within an accounting department. And I don't think GLAD or GLARPR, whatever the acronym is, but I know what it is. I just always screw up the acronym. None of those things are out of date. GL, AP, AR are not out of date or obsolete. It's more a question of, are the systems supporting them becoming obsolete? I think that's the bigger question that I often ask or wonder. And so the question then is, well, is ERP the right mechanism to be supporting that? Do we need fully integrated inventory management within a single ERP system to be able to provide, invoice processing and receivable processing and all that stuff? Obviously, it all has to tie together. The data has to flow across workflows and systems, but my question is, do we need a full-blown massive ERP system to provide relatively foundational, basic types of accounting needs like GL, AP, AR? So that'd be my point, is more around the technology potentially being obsolete, not necessarily the functions themselves.
Yeah, definitely. Our next question today is, if you're going to use an SI for digital transformation or SAP implementation, what are some examples of important questions to ask when you're selecting an SI?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think you have a combination of hard and soft types of things you want to evaluate. On the hard skill side of things, it's, how many of your people are certified, how many of them have actually implemented S4HANA in particular, because you'll find a lot of consultants out there that maybe have implemented ECC or one of the older versions of SAP, but at this point, that doesn't matter. What matters is, do they have experience with S4HANA in implementing it? You also want to know, I would get into not only their S4HANA experience, but I'd also try to understand their experience with whatever type or version of S/4HANA you're implementing. So if you're private cloud, for example, or public cloud, make sure that they have experience with that you have core team members that the SI is providing that has experience with the specific deployment model, because they do look a lot different. And there's a lot of trade-offs and tough decisions that need to be made based on whether you're private or public cloud for S/4HANA, or if you're on premise, that's okay too. But especially if you're public cloud, you want to make sure you have someone who knows that product, because there's less flexibility there and it's harder to bridge the gap between what S/4HANA public cloud can do versus what you might need as a business. So those are some of the hard skills I'd look at when choosing an SAP system integrator. The other more soft skills I would look at is mainly cultural fit. Is this a good fit for your organization? Not just in terms of the individuals that are on the project. Are they people that, are these people that you can imagine being side by side with you for months or years as you go through this project? Are they people you enjoy being around? Because if you don't, it's going to be a long grind, more than it already is going to be if you don't like the people you're with. But beyond just the people, though, the people on the team, by the way, I would say make sure you know who the team members are, not the person selling you the solution, but the actual doers, the people that are actually going to be doing the work. Make sure you meet them, feel comfortable with them. But I also look at the culture of the company itself, the SI itself. Are they looking down on you because you should be lucky to have them as your partner, or are they someone that's going to truly be a partner and work side by side with you, rather than the more call it the more arrogant approach to system integration and technical implementations? Because in the SAP space and even other ERP ecosystems, some of these bigger consulting firms and system integrators can be egotistical, in a way that can be difficult to work with, and they aren't a true partner necessarily. And so you want to make sure you know who it is, the type of company you're working with, and make sure it's a good fit for what you need as an organization.
Yeah, so our first article today is super interesting, actually. It's talking about AI and Google search and all the different things that are kind of going on with that right now. So Penske Media Corporation, which owns Rolling Stone, Billboard, The Hollywood Reporter, and others, has filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google in federal court in Washington, D.C. PMC alleges that Google's AI overviews feature improperly uses in its journalism without permission, reducing web traffic and hurting its revenue. The key takeaways here from PMC are they claim that Google conditions being included in search results on allowing use of content for AI overviews. Otherwise, publishers risk having their context excluded. Traffic and revenue drop. So PMC says that 20% of Google searches that link to its sites now show AI overviews, and that its affiliate revenue has dropped more than 1/3 from its peak in 2024 due to the reduced referral traffic. It's the first among US major publishers. So this is the first time that a large US publisher has sued Google over the AI overview summaries that appear on the top of search results. And Google's response is they defend AI overviews, saying that they improve our user experience and help users discover more content. Google argues that summaries drive traffic to a broader variety of sites. So Eric, with all of this that you're kind of finding out now, how should publishers protect their content rights in the era of AI generated summaries and search features? I know we have ChatGPT, a lot of other things going on. Is there certain content rights or different things like that you can think of that will help protect them?
I don't know that we have an answer to that, or that I certainly don't have an answer to that, because I think it's something that needs to be worked out in the court systems. And we had Marcus Harris, who's an attorney, was on this podcast, or he's been on the podcast several times, but the last time he was on, we were talking about that exact topic, the intellectual property side of it. Who owns the intellectual property if Google or ChatGPT or an AI model learns from someone else's content? How much, what rights do the original authors have over that content? And that's all stuff that still has to be worked out. I think we're many years away from having that get resolved, especially internationally in different court systems, because you might end up with different answers in different court systems, which is going to make it even more confusing, because you're probably not going to have the same answer to that question globally. It's going to be a different answer probably in different parts of the world. So I think that's going to be the real challenge and the real interesting thing. You do have to wonder, though, is if you're Rolling Stone or if you're one of these traditional media outlets, you do have to ask yourself, should we be wasting our time suing to protect a dying business model? Or do we figure out a way to change our business model. I know we had a client recently, a few years ago, that's a publishing company, and they do like academic journals and textbooks and heavy hitting or hardcore academic type content. A publishing company, and they were threatened by in the Europe. There's a movement called open source knowledge. It's basically democratizing knowledge and information to where you shouldn't have to have money, or you shouldn't have to pay extra money or exorbitant amounts of money to get access to information and knowledge. And so it was basically commoditizing knowledge and books and academic journals and things like that. And I know they struggled with that too, because that chipped away at their market share. But that was a regulatory thing, I believe. I think that was something that the EU implemented, if I remember correctly. So they couldn't really fight it necessarily because it was legislated by the government. But it does remind me of that. It's like, do you fight that, or do you find a way to change your business model, which they had to do? They had to move to more of a digital model. They had to create more high value, more engaging stuff that was different than what you could get through open source academia in Europe. And I'd say the same thing to Rolling Stone. Find a different model, or evolve your business model, because no matter, even if you win this battle, it's going to take you years and years. And what are you going to rely on the damages you might get to save your company, or to give you a cash infusion that you wouldn't otherwise have? If that's the case, that's probably not the best use of your time and money and your overall strategy, because the tides seem to be turning. So you might as well figure out a way to monetize it. A lot like it's kind of like the music industry. I mean, the music industry went through a seismic shift a couple decades ago, and file sharing and downloadable music became a thing, and they had to figure out a way to change their business model to become more successful. The music industry didn't continue to thrive simply because they won in courts, which they did in many cases. That's not why they're still thriving today. It's because they changed their business model to make money in the new economy, the new way of distributing music. And I think that's the way Rolling Stone needs to look at it. I just can't think of a much more of an outdated model than what traditional print media has right now.
For sure. And one question kind of on like the user side of me and you, if we're searching something on Google, how can users be educated about the distinction between AI summaries and original content, and why following links to the source still matters, or does it matter in that case?
Yeah, I think it does matter. I mean, you think about how often we Google something because we want a simple answer, and that's fine. You can get the AI summary for that. But if you want a deeper dive understanding, then you're going to want to click through to the source content, or to the source material, because stuff gets lost in translation. AI still is summarizing or paraphrasing what you said. They're not going to give you word for word verbatim what you published. So if you want to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, there's still something to be said for that human touch, or that human knowledge that AI doesn't have. And I know for us, like at Third Stage, we publish a lot of print stuff still. We still do blogs in addition to videos and social media posts and whatnot. And you and others on our marketing team have pointed out that our web traffic that originates from ChatGPT and AI models is actually increasing quite a bit, but our web traffic from traditional Google search is going down. And so, we can either pay, like I know Google would want you to pay for more pay-per-click on the organics, or on the normal search, but that's a dying model too, it seems. I mean, I could be wrong, but we have to keep an eye on that. But I think it is an opportunity to get, AI does give you an opportunity to get in front of more people, because now more people are using AI than we're using Google, or at least more consistently, for some of the heavy hitting or deeper research that people want to do. So I think it is an opportunity to get in front of more people and to get more visibility for your brand with AI or ChatGPT.
For sure. I mean, everybody's still searching different things, right? It just depends on where they're searching. So it might just be a shift in where they're coming from, but how can we capitalize on that for sure? And how can other companies capitalize on that? So I think that's really important for different companies, and maybe Rolling Stone to figure out as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
So for our next article today, it is a very interesting one. It talks more about, speaking of ChatGPT, talks more about OpenAI and ChatGPT. So what's happening is Microsoft and OpenAI have agreed to a non-binding deal that would allow OpenAI to restructure itself into a for-profit company. So this new model would look like AI is pushing towards a more conventional corporate structure, likely to help raise capital and then eventually go public, is what the speculation is. The deal is tied to OpenAI seeking private market valuation of about $500 billion. Nonprofit arm remains in stake for OpenAI, so their nonprofit side is expected to receive over $100 billion in the new structure. And Microsoft's role within this is changing. So under the old terms, Microsoft had exclusive rights to sell OpenAI softwares through its Azure cloud and preferred access to OpenAI's technology. The new structure may reduce Microsoft's exclusivity, and then changes need to be signed off, obviously, from regulators in California and Delaware. OpenAI remains to complete the conversation by the end of the year. So we'll kind of see and update everybody on how this develops over the next few months. But Eric, with all of this, what are the risks for OpenAI's nonprofit mission if it becomes a for-profit company?
Yeah, I actually watched or listened to a podcast. I can't remember the name of it, but it's about OpenAI and the evolution of the company and how Sam Altman started it and the unusual, non-traditional governance structure that they have in place, where I think the board is non for profit, but the company itself is for profit, or maybe it's the other way around. But they've always had this conflict as a company, like from their start. They've had a bit of a conflict behind, are they there to make money, or are they there to provide more social good, or whatever you want to call it? Although some would argue it's not providing social good, but that's a whole nother conversation for another time. So I think they've got to figure out what they want to be. I mean, in some ways it has sort of worked that they've balanced the two, or they've had the tension between for-profit and not-for-profit. It's probably helped them have a more balanced view of, yeah, we want to be, we want to provide societal good, but we also have to make money. So it's probably good that they're trying to do both, but I imagine the conflicts behind the scenes are pretty significant, because at some point you have to decide which is going to be more important, because you're going to have to make more of a trade-off than you might want otherwise. So I don't know. I have never heard of that sort of corporate structure before, that sort of corporate governance structure before, where there's both not-for-profit and for-profit motives that are in conflict with one another. Normally I would see misalignment like that, or competing goals, as a negative thing. But in this case, it maybe with where they are and the maturity of the product, it's a good thing, because it's helped it get to the point where it has reached scale economically, but it's also still reliable. Doesn't seem overtly biased or political at this point. Although, there's times where I've looked for stuff and it won't give me the answer because of some sort of human filter they've put in place, which does make you wonder at some point in the future, is, human bias or economic incentive or some other factor going to overwhelm, the other factors in it. I don't know, but that is a really interesting point though.
And do you think they mentioned potentially wanting to go public. Do you think there's pressures for them to go public as a company? And do you think this will affect their strategy as a company overall?
Yeah, I don't know if there's pressure for them to go public. I think there's an opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity there. I think if they do go public, or when they do, assuming they do, they are going to do well, because everyone wants to cash in on the AI trend. That's a big part of why NVIDIA has become such a huge valued company, largely because of AI and the fact that they support AI and their business does better the better AI is doing. I imagine ChatGPT being the leader really in consumer-based AI, at least. And even on the business side too, a lot of AI tools are using ChatGPT behind the scenes. So I imagine their prominence in the AI space would give them a huge valuation. So I could see why there's pressure for them to go public, because investors probably want it. The bankers want it. I imagine the founders of the company probably want it too, to some degree. So there's a lot of people with a lot to gain by that IPO going well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super interesting. We'll definitely follow that throughout the rest of this year and see if they kind of end that conversation like they said they're hoping to by the end of the year, and keep everybody updated on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are good topics, good food for thought. It's fun to watch how fast all this is all changing, and all the new curveballs we get in this industry with no clear answers in some cases. So I'd love to hear from the audience what they think about the OpenAI thing, and whether or not an IPO for-profit approach is a good thing, or whether that's going to create more problems than it solves. I'd love to hear the audience's thoughts on that too. So we're going to shift gears though. When we come back, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, I'm going to talk about why digital transformations fail. More specifically, I'm going to share some of the summarized thoughts or topics from my new book called Welcome to the Jungle that was just released. It is available now. You can order an electronic copy or physical hard copies wherever in the world we are. So be sure to check it out on Amazon. There's also a link to the book below, but we're going to talk about some of the lessons and findings from that book here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll continue the thread about AI when we talk about why smart business leaders, or what smart business leaders know about AI success and some of the lessons you can take away from that. So we're going to cover all that and more when we come back from a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 241. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, and it's produced by Major Tom Productions. So if you'd like to collaborate with us on this podcast or other content that we produce, feel free to reach out to us. We've included contact information below for sponsorship and collaboration opportunities. So I want to shift gears a bit here and talk about my new book. So I have a new book coming out that just came out, I should say, that is called Welcome to the Jungle. And it is available now on Amazon. You can get an electronic copy on Kindle or whatever ebook reader you prefer. You can also get hard copies of it shipped to you anywhere in the world. So be sure to check that out. We've included a link to the book below. But what I want to do today is talk about some of the lessons from the book. And in the book, there's a lot that we cover in terms of case studies of failures, but more importantly, or just as importantly, we talk about why those projects failed and what you can do differently to avoid some of the chaos and the disruption caused by failed implementations. You know, one thing that I struggled with after I wrote my last book was called The Final Countdown. It was about digital strategy and how to manage digital transformations. One thing I noticed about that book, even though I am proud of it, it's my first book, I'll always be proud of it, but I felt like it was a bit too academic and theoretical. So I wanted to write a book that was more case study driven, giving specific examples, talking about specific projects and failure points. And so that was really the premise of wanting to write this book, was not only to make it more case study driven and make it more relatable and more tangible, but also to talk more about failures and the root causes of failure. So rather than talking about academic theoretic stuff, or rather than talking about something very specific to digital transformation, like change management or good project management, how important that can be to a project, I didn't want to focus just on one discipline within digital transformation. I wanted to talk about what are the root causes of failures when companies struggle with their implementations. And there's plenty of data out there, plenty of studies out there that confirm and validate that most digital transformation projects fail. In fact, the numbers have been pretty steady over the last couple decades, right at anywhere from 70 or 80% or more. Whether you look at Gartner, McKinsey, Bain, any of those big consulting and analyst firms that study these sorts of projects, they'll consistently tell you that most of these projects fail. And in fact, when you look at AI initiatives, I've seen even higher numbers, as high as 95% of AI initiatives failing. And you think, well, AI has so much potential. There's so much hype around it. How could it possibly fail? And why are companies struggling so much? And the good news, bad news is it's nothing different than they've struggled with for the last couple of decades. If I look at the failure points that organizations have been struggling with since I started my career, it's a lot of the same mistakes, a lot of the same patterns that we're starting to see over the years, or that we're continuing to see over the years as organizations continue to make the same sorts of mistakes. And so that's what we want to talk about here today, is dive into a few case studies from the book, Welcome to the Jungle, which again, if you're just joining now, you can scan this QR code right here and you can access that book. You can pre-order it. It's going to be released in just a few days on the 28th of September. So you can pre-order it. You can also get a paper copy and hardcover copy as of the 28th when it's released. So be sure to check that out. But we're going to talk today about some of the highlights from the book, some of the case studies and some of the findings from the book. I want to summarize for you what is in that book. But before I jump in here, even further than I already have, I'd love to hear where in the world you're joining from today. So whatever city and country you're joining from, love to hear your feedback. So please drop in the chat what city and country are you joining from. I'm keeping an eye on the chat here. I'm going to take your questions too. So any questions you have, please feel free to chime in and drop those in the chat. I'm watching it across all the major platforms here. So love to hear your feedback. And in addition to letting me know what city and country you're joining from, if you don't mind, just drop in the chat and let me know what you think the number one cause of failure is. What have you seen to be the biggest problem in these sorts of digital transformations? Or if you've never been through one, or you haven't really experienced the pain of one, what do you think the biggest problem would be, or the biggest challenge would be for digital transformations? I'd love to hear your feedback. So drop that in the chat as well, if you don't mind. City and country you're joining from, as well as letting me know what some of the biggest challenges are that you're facing. So I talked about a little bit about why I wrote the book, and it really was intended to help leaders survive and thrive in what is typically a chaotic environment. So when organizations go through these sorts of projects, they're always going to be disruptive. They're always going to be somewhat messy, somewhat chaotic. But I think organizations create a lot of self-inflicted harm that doesn't need to be as complicated as it is. So many organizations make the same mistakes, as I mentioned before. They're making a lot of the same mistakes that they were making 10, 20, 30 years ago. So why is that? Why has technology advanced so much? We presumably, as an industry, have surely learned our mistakes over the last few decades, but for some reason, we haven't. The industry continues to struggle. Our project recovery practice, which is the part of our business where we help companies that have failed in their implementations, we help get them back on track, or in some more extreme cases, they're in the lawsuit stage of a project. So there's litigation happening, whether it's arbitration or through a court system. We'll get hired as an expert witness in those cases. But if you look at all of our project recovery and expert witness work that we do as a company, it's well over half of our revenue is coming from failed and troubled implementations. And while this might be good for our business, it's not good for the industry and it's not good for our clients. And so I would much rather help more companies avoid some of these common challenges and sticking points and stumbling points, help them avoid that from the start, and certainly hire us for potentially other types of work. That's some of the things we want to talk about. Why are companies continuing to struggle, even though they've spent decades learning, and technology has advanced so much over the years. Sam has an interesting question here. Sam on LinkedIn says many companies don't fully understand what they're getting into. These projects need to start with education for the C-suite and the core internal team. So I think that's absolutely right. You need to go in with your eyes wide open, and certainly sharing content like this with leaders throughout your organization or your peers is one way to do that. Sharing thought leadership like this conversation, like the book that I'm publishing, other thought leadership that's out there from others. You want to make sure that people really understand what they're getting themselves into, because it's easy to get into these projects with rose-colored glasses and have an overly optimistic view of these projects and how they're going to go. And we all want to be optimists. We want to plan aggressively. We want to plan for success. But we also want to recognize that the only way we can be successful is if we see the pitfalls and the landmines along the way, and we know how to avoid them. We learn how to avoid them. Pitfalls and landmines aren't going anywhere. They're always going to be there. But the key is, how do we mitigate the risk, and how do we avoid stepping on them? And it's always amazing to me that organizations continue to step on the same landmines that we'll get into here today. I also want to say to Mohammed on YouTube, joining from Iran, thank you for joining here today. Babulal, joining from a remote village in India, thank you for being here today. I appreciate having you here. And then we also have Tom Weeks joining on LinkedIn, I believe it is. Whoops. Yep. So thanks for joining here today. Another comment here that's really interesting. We're already getting straight into prescriptive mode here and looking for solutions. So thank you for your comment here. Sanjay says most of the companies don't invest much in upskilling the employees in technology sector and have realistic change management, which is a really, really good point. Why the jungle metaphor or analogy? First of all, many of you may recognize the song title in the title of the book, Welcome to the Jungle. And that's one of my favorite songs from the 80s rock era. And I also think that it's a great analogy for digital transformations, because companies are going through a jungle. There's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of surprises, a lot of things that can derail you if you aren't prepared for it. And that was really the premise of the book, and why I wanted to name it Welcome to the Jungle. It has the rock and roll connection, as much of my content does. And it also creates what I consider to be a powerful analogy behind what leadership teams are going through and what they should be prepared to expect when they go through these projects. So that's the premise for the title, and it's full of unknowns. There's predators, there's storms, there's dead ends. When you think of a jungle, those are the things you typically think of. You think of wild animals and danger, and you've got to be aware. You've got to be alert. You've got to be a little bit paranoid. You can be optimistic. You need to have a compass, a map, a roadmap to get out of the jungle. And that's a lot like what we're doing here as leaders. Is just like explorers, companies tend to lead without a proper map. Companies are a guide. And if an explorer doesn't have a proper map, compass, or guide, or isn't aware of the risk of where they're going, they're probably not going to survive in the jungle. And that's why a lot of organizations tend to struggle, is they aren't prepared. They don't have the right roadmap, or they have a biased roadmap that a vendor created for them, or a technology implementation partner or a system integrator created for them. And typically that is not a complete or realistic plan of how to get out of the jungle. It's only giving you one tool that you might need to manage your entire journey. So we also want to ensure that, we want to recognize that most failures come from misjudging the environment. It's not from technology alone. It's pretty rare that we go into a transformation in a recovery mode, help a client get back on track, and find that, wow, this technology is really screwed up, or this technology just isn't fit for purpose, or this technology wasn't designed and deployed well. Now, it may not have been designed and deployed well in a way that matches the business, but technically speaking, the software oftentimes works. And so the challenge is typically less related to the technology and a lot more related to the people and process side of things. So that's the next thing to recognize is that piece of it, that there's so much of a challenge there as it relates to the environment, to the people and process sides of things, the alignment, making sure your leadership is educated. But as I think Sam mentioned a moment ago, those are all very important things to recognize here. So as I continue here, I want to get into a few other comments here. One from LinkedIn from Abulal. How do we bridge the critical intranet phase, in transit phase, where both current systems and future AI platforms fall short of being the sole source of truth? And that's a great question that's worth noting here, in that there is this transition phase we're going through where, I was just talking to the client I'm at here today, this week, that I'm visiting with. We were having this conversation yesterday with their leadership team about what is the future of ERP. Is now really a time to double down on a technology that may be going away or maybe significantly changing as a category overall? And that's one of the big challenges that I think organizations have to face, or one of the big unknowns is what's going to happen to the big monolithic ERP vendors. Are they going to ride the AI train and the AI wave successfully, or is someone else going to come in and disrupt it like some already are? And is that going to destroy, or at the very least minimize, the importance of that whole ERP software category? I don't have a good answer to that question, but it is something that we have to think about, is how do we manage this transition from the way technology is today to where it's going to be in the future? And then in the meantime, how do we manage data? How do we manage our processes? How do we manage our business? And I think the key here is to recognize a couple things. One is we don't have all the answers. None of us do. We don't really know what's going to happen here in the next 3, 5, or 10 years as it relates to enterprise technology, which leads me to the second point, which is even more important, which is businesses need to do what's right for their business. I mean, they have to look at what they know today, recognize there's some things they don't know, recognize there's uncertainty no matter what you do. But the one thing that's certain is if you don't manage these sorts of projects well, you're going to have problems. You're going to have challenges. You're going to spend way too much time and money on it. So let's focus on managing that risk, because right now the only thing that's certain is these projects are they're difficult. They're just difficult to manage. They're challenging. Oftentimes they get distressed along the way. So we have to recognize that this is the landscape we're dealing with. We might want it to be different, but it's not. So how do we manage that accordingly? I think is one of the really important things we've got to manage here. So another comment here from Sanjay on LinkedIn says most of the companies don't invest much in upskilling employees in the technology sector. I think I mentioned that one already. Sorry about that. This is the one I meant to pull up here. This is another comment from LinkedIn. Digital transformation is still seen as an IT issue. Organizations rely on the applications and the IT implementation teams to perform the heavy lift. Most organizations don't understand that the underlying change needs to occur within the operational confines of the organization. Processes, resource alignment, and what problems are to be addressed need to be hashed out and included in the overall plan. It's a very good point there. Ivana on LinkedIn says, thank you always for sharing such valuable information. And Diana also recognizes the Guns N' Roses reference there. So thank you. I hope you enjoy the song and the title of the book. Sam mentions on LinkedIn, it's not rock and roll, but I remember Peter, Paul, and Mary singing, "When Will They Ever Learn?" Some might argue that song is more rock than a lot of actual rock songs, but point well taken there. And that is another good song that could relate to these sorts of projects. And here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn that'll lead into some of the other points I was going to make here today. And that is, you highlight that failures usually come from misjudging the environment rather than the technology. Could you share an example of what misjudging the environment looks like in a real project? And I think the key thing here is misjudging the environment. So one of the key things about misjudging the environment is not fully understanding the resources required to make the project successful, whether it's time, money, people, risk, all the things we have to invest in these sorts of projects to recognize what those requirements are, or they have a more optimistic view of what those projects really are. So those are all things that are worth noting. And those are examples of the things that companies oftentimes misjudge. And I think where this comes from, these unrealistic expectations and this lack of awareness of your surroundings and the environment you're stepping into in the jungle is largely driven by the technology industry itself. You have software vendors who are trying to sell software. So if they're going to sell you software, they can't be scaring you too much. They can't be setting your expectations too realistically, because you might freak out. You may not buy the software, or you may decide that you want to defer the software decision or the software investment until you manage some of the risk yourselves, which oftentimes is more internal than it is external. So that's one thing, is you've got software vendors and sales reps who are just human. And I'm not saying it's okay, but they're human. They're trying to make their commission checks, and they are going to do what they need to do to close a deal. And to close a deal, you can't be sharing too much or be too forthcoming about the risk of these projects. You had to insult to injury by throwing in the system integrators and the technology implementers, these partners of the software vendors who are heavily compensated, measured, and incentivized to sell as much software as possible, and to ensure that the client implements as many modules, as many subscriptions of the software as possible. That's their job, and that's their myopic focus. So they're going to go in with blinders to figure out a way to help you implement technology in a way that takes full advantage of the potential that you might invest in. So I think those are the big things right there. Is you have an entire industry that is wired around mismanaging expectations, not intentionally. No one had a master plan back in the day of, hey, let's mislead all the customers that are about to buy technology. But given human behavior from sales reps, from the software vendors, and over optimism from leaders, and a lack of understanding of knowing any better from the implementers, the buyers of technology, the ones that are actually going to implement the technology, you combine all those factors and you get a perfect storm of mismanaged expectations. And then you add another layer, which is now you've got industry analysts and consultants that are paid by the software vendors to put out positive messaging related to technology. And now all of a sudden we're super excited about AI and all these cool, sexy technologies, but we're not thinking about risk, because risk is not nearly as cool to think about. It's not nearly as fun to think about it as thinking about AI and AI agents and predictive analytics and automation and all this cool stuff that could really transform our businesses if we do it right. So we're going to tend to gravitate to the shiny object. We're not going to gravitate to the stuff that isn't so shiny or fun, which unfortunately is risk management, project planning, strategy, that sort of thing. Although I think this stuff's cool. Most people don't. Some might call me strange or weird because I like that stuff, but most don't. Most are going to gravitate toward the technology. So great questions there. Thank you for that. And in just a moment, by the way, I'm going to have this awkward moment where I have to get up and move to another room. So I guess you could see maybe behind the scenes of trying to do a podcast on the road in gypsy style. That's what you'll get to see here today. So I apologize. In a few minutes here, I'm going to be walking, and we'll probably have a quick break as I switch rooms here, because I am going to get kicked out of the room I'm in right now. So, I want to get into a couple case studies around the jungle. And this is something that I cover in the book. There's a lot of case studies that are peppered throughout the entire book. And I do hope you enjoy it. I hope you read it. Again, QR code right here. If you want to read about it, pre-order it now. It's only $10. You can get the electronic copy on the 28th. You'll receive it. Or if you order on the 28th, you can also order the hardcover or paper back version of the book. So, and you can order it wherever in the world you are. You don't have to be in the US where I am. You can be anywhere in the world and order the book electronically or the physical version of it. But some of the case studies we talk about, there's a few in particular. One is that I talk about a lot in my YouTube channel and LinkedIn newsletters and whatnot. In fact, I just posted something today on LinkedIn about this, or reposted, I should say, a newsletter I wrote a few months ago about Lidl, which had a $600 million SAP failure. They went to implement SAP S4HANA. They scrapped the project after spending 600 million euros 500 million euros, which is closer to 600 million US dollars on the project. And some of the core issues they had was they were trying to force some of their old processes into the new software. Although what's really interesting about this one is I'm not certain how important let me rephrase that. It is important, but I'm not certain how much this is an issue of the company not having a willingness to change versus a need that's legitimate. So in other words, whenever a client of ours wants to customize software, you have to distinguish between, is this a legitimate business need, a must-have, something that it would make sense that off-the-shelf software couldn't handle, so we know we need to customize it because it preserves the client's secret sauce or competitive advantage. But then there's other types of customization requests where it's like, well, yeah, maybe it doesn't look the same as your old legacy processes, but you don't necessarily need those old legacy processes. You could change and be fine and not lose any real advantage you have as a company. And it's usually not one answer or the other, but each process, each decision typically falls into one of those buckets. And a lot of companies have they struggle with how to navigate that and make the right decision around, is this a real business need? Is this a real thing that we do need to customize, or are we just being resistant to change? Software vendors will typically tell companies, which I don't agree with this, but they'll typically tell them, hey, you're just resisting change. We have best practices in our software. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes there is best practice in the software, if you want to call it that, even though I don't enjoy that term. I think it's misleading, but that is a term that's often used in our industry. So clients or software vendors will oftentimes be dismissive of areas of competitive strength and just say, hey, just do what our software does despite its limitations, because that is what we would consider best practice. However, you have to look at this as a business and say, well, that's not best practice for us necessarily. There could be some things that, yes, if it's accounts payable related, for example, and we're going to pay our vendors, a certain way, do we really need to redesign that process? Probably not. But if it's something customer facing, or it's an area of strength that you have as an organization, you're able to ship product faster than other organizations, you're able to provide services faster. If it's something related to that and the software is actually slowing you down off the shelf, then yeah, maybe you do need to customize the software or change it or tailor it in a way that fits what you want your business to look like. And again, it's not just one answer or the other for all your processes. Every process decision is going to fall into different buckets potentially. And so navigating that is something that's real challenging and important to navigate. So in the case of Lidl, they had a different inventory evaluation method that they used that SAP did not support. Whether or not they could have just adapted to SAP's out of the box standard, I don't know. But for whatever reason, they viewed inventory evaluation and the way they handled inventory evaluation, they viewed that as important. It could have been regulatory. It could have been just the way they insisted on having it. But I don't know that that's the important thing. The important thing here is, how do you navigate that? What do you do when you run into a challenge like that? And that was one of the big problems they had, is they tried to change the software in the way that created a lot of challenges for them. And then the jungle metaphor, bringing it back to the Welcome to the Jungle theme here, is that, a big part of what Lidl struggled with is they refused to adapt to the new system, the new terrain. For better or for worse, they chose SAP. They didn't adapt to the software the way it was built, and they ended up changing a lot of things, and they ended up dragging some of their old baggage through the jungle instead of traveling light. So you've probably heard this concept of clean core. It's a common term in ERP in general, but especially in the world of SAP and S/4HANA. There's this concept of start with a clean core, get rid of your customization, get rid of your dirty data, and start clean with a new system. Easier said than done, of course. It's, if you're a business owner or a business executive, that may sound slightly horrifying, but from a technical perspective, a technology perspective, it can actually be a pretty effective way to implement new technology. But the problem is, this isn't about deploying technology. This is about transforming your business to change it, to improve it, to make it more competitive in the future landscape. So that's the lesson, or one of the lessons, or a couple of the lessons from Lidl. There's also, that I think the big takeaway from Lidl too is that they had the ways they'd always done things and they didn't want to change. And again, there might have been some areas where they had very legitimate, solid business reasons for not changing, but there's probably a lot of areas where they refused the change, or they resisted the way SAP is built, and they probably could have changed in some cases. Now, again, it's easier said than done. They probably had good reason for pushing back on a lot of these changes, but as a strong leader, sometimes you have to know when to override or to convince people that they shouldn't be force fitting their old businesses or their old processes into the technology the way it was built. So some of the other case studies we cover in the book, another one we cover is Hershey's. Hershey's, the candy company. They went to implement and went live with a new system shortly before Halloween, which is one of the peak candy buying seasons, at least in the US and much of the Western world. And they decided, for whatever reason, that they would go live right around the time when retailers were having a spike in demand, or they're having a spike in orders for candy to stock up their shelves for Halloween. Why they chose that as a go live date, I have no idea. I don't think I'll ever fully understand that, but that is a real challenge and a real thing that they struggled with, is that they went live right before peak season. And it also turns out they had a pretty unrealistic timeline. They blew past their timeline and budget. Again, getting back to the whole unrealistic expectation thing. I'm here talking about lessons from digital transformation failures in my new book called Welcome to the Jungle. I've got a lot more to cover, but we'll be right back. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I don't mind letting you down easy, but just give it time. If it don't hurt now, but just wait a while.
I want to share a little bit of information about Third Stage Consulting and who we are. Third Stage Consulting Group is an independent, technology agnostic provider of consulting services to help clients through their digital transformations. We help with digital strategy and software selection, as well as implementation planning. And during implementation, we provide services related to program management, organizational change, business process improvement, as well as enterprise architecture. These are just some of the services we provide. We have offices in North America as well as Europe and Asia Pacific. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to check out our resource center, which includes a number of resources that will help you through your digital transformation, and you can access that for free using the QR code here or the links below. You can also reach out to me directly if you'd like to discuss your digital transformation and brainstorm ideas on how to improve where you're headed on your journey.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 241. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. We're here having a conversation about my new book called Welcome to the Jungle. And more specifically, we're talking about why digital transformations fail and some of the lessons from that book. There's also another one that's a little bit more recent than Hershey's. Hershey's, by the way, was back in the late 90s. So that was about 25 years ago. But the reason in this book I pull so many different case studies from different eras in time, different types of technologies, is because you see that the patterns can repeat themselves regardless of time and place, regardless of technology, regardless of geography or location of an organization. You tend to find that these patterns repeat themselves, and that's one of the big challenges that I see in this industry. Is it doesn't seem like we've adequately learned from our mistakes to be able to avoid some of these challenges that organizations are facing. So another more recent one, that was 1999 with Hershey's. Another more recent case study in the book that's also more of a public sector example. We have a lot of case studies around the private sector and the public sector in the book. But one of the big profile case studies in the public sector is Birmingham City Council in the UK. And also somewhat related to that is Cook County in the US. So you've got Birmingham City Council in the UK, Cook County in the US. Both of these case studies we unpack in detail, but just for brevity purposes, I'll lump them together here today because they are very similar. And in both cases with Birmingham and Cook County, these are multi-million-dollar overruns. They didn't have a clear strategy and governance, and there were lawsuits in both cases. In fact, I believe Cook County is taking legal action right now against their software vendor. In fact, I was just recently interviewed on broadcast news in the US to discuss that particular case study and helping them recognize and understand and unpack why Cook County is struggling in their implementations. It was also interesting in the news segment too that I was interviewed for. It wasn't about technology or systems necessarily. It was more about how the failure is affecting citizens, which I thought was really interesting because a lot of times in these projects, it's easy to think that, okay, yeah, we've got to worry about ourselves and make sure that our core team is taken care of. We need to make sure that employees aren't too stressed out or too burned out from the changes or too disrupted by the changes. But you also have customers and citizens that are affected. And for a government entity, there's a lot at stake. If you're in healthcare, there's a lot at stake. If you're in any sort of nonprofit or purpose-driven organization, faith-based organization, that sort of thing, you're going to have more disruption to more people than just your own internal team. And your own internal team should be enough to motivate you, but for some organizations, the stakes are even higher because the work that they do as an organization has wide-ranging consequences and impacts on people. And that was certainly the case with government, or that is the case with government examples like Birmingham City and Cook County. And so they didn't have the right alignment and oversight. So they let these projects spiral out of control. And you think about all the collateral damage from that. Employees get stressed out. You get citizens who aren't getting their tax money or their refunds from property taxes in the case of Cook County. And so the jungle metaphor here is that, in these cases, everyone was headed in different directions. There wasn't clear alignment in these organizations as far as how they were going to make decisions, what they wanted the technology to accomplish for them, what their strategy was, what their timeline was. They didn't have a realistic, aligned approach, and it wasn't well thought through. I think what happened in both cases, from what we can tell, is they deferred to the experts, the outside consultants, the outside technology vendors and providers, and based their decisions based on the input they were getting from them. And one thing you have to keep in mind is when you're hiring a technology vendor and or a technology implementer, that's just one work stream within a broader program. So generally speaking, your overall digital transformation is a big program. Technology, your ERP provider is just one work stream within that program, but chances are pretty high you have multiple technologies with multiple technology work streams. On the non-technology side, you're going to have change management, learning and training and development, architecture, integration, data migration, all these different things that need to come together into one complete program. But when you go to a vendor, you're getting one work stream within an entire program. You're not getting the entire program, and someone needs to manage that entire program. And that someone is typically you, the leadership of the organization. And that's the big blind spot that a lot of organizations don't recognize. They don't recognize the broader program, the broader big picture. And it's a lot like, I try to equate it to another analogy or metaphor, which is if you were to build a house, let's just say you want to have a nice 2-story house with running water. Well, okay, we all want running water, but we're not going to call the plumber on day one to come in and build, do the piping and the plumbing when the foundation hasn't even been built yet. We haven't done the framing. We haven't done anything yet. So the last thing you need is a plumber showing up on site on day one of your construction job of a new house. But that's essentially what organizations are doing when they hire software vendors. They're bringing in the plumber on day one, and they are not ready for the plumber. They've got a lot more stuff that they need to do for the overall program, the overall transformation, the overall house, if you will. So that's the sort of thing that needs a change in the industry. Is we have to recognize the reality of what it is we're doing. We're not implementing technology. We're not plumbing. We're not implementing we're not implementing running water. We're implementing a house we can live in with running water. And so you need to plan accordingly. You need that general contractor to help manage all the pieces and have that clear plan of how all the pieces tie together. And that's where a lot of clients will hire us for help, is to do exactly that. So I'm going to get to a couple of audience questions here before I keep going on here and with more case studies, although I've got a lot more to cover. Some really good ones here. Here's a question that I think we'll answer as we go through the conversation here. This is from Socrates on LinkedIn. It says, could you please share the common blind spot for the companies that fail transformation? I think we just talked about one, and I'll get to more here as we go through some of these case studies. Here's a question from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, since the jungle metaphor resonates, do you see each of these case studies as a different kind of jungle danger, such as predators equating to vendor bias, storms equating to unrealistic timelines, baggage equating to customization, etc.? And yes, I do actually think that each case study has some differences, but when you start to look at a bunch of case studies, like in the book, you'll see, I don't know, at least 20 or 30 different case studies that are peppered throughout. You'll see some common patterns. I mean, some of them are different. You put two failures side by side, they're going to look a little bit different. But when you look at 10, 20, 30 of them side by side, which we do as a consulting company, that's what we do in our expert witness practice, is we go in and we analyze failures. When it's a project recovery where we have to get the project back on track, we will analyze those as well. And you start to see a lot of the same patterns. It may not be exactly the same side by side, but you start to see, a handful of, 10 to 15 common mistakes that are commonly repeated. Maybe not all 10 to 15 all at once, but most companies have several of those 10 or 15 common failure points. And what we're doing here today is trying to talk about some of the biggest ones, some of the most common ones are what we're covering here in today's case studies, but the book itself gets into a lot more detail. Here's a comment from Sam on LinkedIn. It's quite incredible that Lidl got so far into the project before realizing that there was a fundamental issue. That's a great point, and something I glossed over, which is how do you let several $100 million slip through your fingers before calling a timeout and saying, wait, hold on, something doesn't seem right here. A lot of these projects just get completely out of control, and shame on the vendor and the system integrator for letting things spiral out of control and not managing the project better, but shame on the organization too for not having better visibility. I always equate these sorts of projects or contrast them to big capital investments that companies might make in other areas, like building a new factory, or if they were to go do a big acquisition, they're going to acquire another company. They would do tons of due diligence, tons of planning. They would dive in and they would try to uncover every nook and cranny of understanding where the risk is, what they're getting themselves into. If they're building a factory, they're definitely not going to let it go 5-10 times over budget, 5 or 10 times past the timeline. They just wouldn't let it happen. But yet on these technology projects, it's almost like everyone's too scared or unaware of how to manage the projects better, which I don't fully understand, because there's plenty of people out there that do know how. It's just a matter of how do you put all the pieces together. Despite an industry that has a bad track record, there are some very smart people in this industry that can help you. So the question is, how do you leverage more of that help to be more successful? Here's another question here, a comment from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, you point out that organizations often defer to vendors or consultants and forget they're only buying one work stream of a bigger program. If you're advising leadership teams, what's the simplest way to keep that general contractor mindset front and center? That's a great question, because I'd say the biggest way to do this is to remember that it's your project, right? It's not your vendors, it's not your consultants, it's not your system integrator or technology implementer. It's your project. You're the one that has to make sure this is successful. And that's where companies tend to fail, is they think, well, it's not my responsibility. I hired Accenture, I hired SAP, I hired Microsoft, I hired some big name to take care of this for me, and they failed me. And that's a cop-out, to be honest. I mean, if I'm just being candid, that's not a good excuse. I mean, if you hire an employee who's awful and is sabotaging your business, maybe they're stealing from you, I don't know, they're doing some terrible stuff in your organization, you're probably not just going to stand by and let them do it because you're not the expert of what that employee knows or does. So you're just going to let it ride. It just wouldn't fly. So why are you letting it fly with a technology project? And that's where I get frustrated sometimes with buyers in the industry, is because ultimately, just like any big business decision or investment or risk that you take on as a business, you have to manage that risk, and you have to ultimately be the one that pivots, that changes strategy, changes course when they need to, swaps out resources if you need to. That's up to you to do. If you need to bring in third-party independent tech agnostic support, for example, you can go hire a company like ours, like Third Stage, to come help. You don't need approval or even buy-in from your other contractors. You don't need someone who's going to be threatened by the fact that someone's going to come in and hold them to be accountable and help manage them better than they can manage themselves. That's you, the business, that are going to live with the consequences. It's your checkbook, it's your time, it's your resources. You need to make sure you manage it. And Sam on LinkedIn just said it much better than I just did, much more concisely. There's a difference between delegation and abdication, which is a great line of thought. I love that line of thought. There's a book out there called E-Myth Revisited, I think it's called. It's about scaling businesses. And they talk a lot about this exact point here, which is you can delegate, but you can't completely abdicate responsibility. You're still responsible, just like you're responsible for your employees. You delegate to them, but you are responsible if they do something. You might have to fire that person. You might have to hold them accountable, but it's ultimately on you to make the decision you need to make to manage that. And that's a really important, well said point, Sam. So thank you for that. I'm going to get into just one more case study here in the interest of time. And then I want to get into some of the common themes that we see across all these different case studies, and some of the case studies we've talked about here today, and a lot of the case studies we haven't talked about. So One last case study, though, before I get to that, is an organization called SAAQ, which is in Quebec, Canada, in the province of Quebec in Canada. There is something called SAAQ, which is their motor vehicle authority, and it's a French phrase. I took 2 years of French in high school, just enough to be dangerous. I'm not going to try and pronounce it, but SAAQ is a French term that essentially means it's the society, I think Society for Automotive something in Quebec. And it's essentially where you go to get your car registered, pay your taxes for your car and all that stuff. So they recently had an implementation that got really interesting and really dramatic, I'd say. They not only had a failure that was over $1 billion Canadian dollars of implement, and I did say 1 billion with a B, not an M, with a B. They spent 1.1 billion Canadian dollars, and it left citizens unable to renew their licenses. It caused a ton of chaos, and some of the root causes of what happened with them was that they had inadequate change management training. They didn't really address the people side of the equation, and it was a lot like, going back to the jungle metaphor. It was a lot like sending your people into the jungle without any preparation or training, without a compass, without a roadmap, without survival tools. You're sending them out into the jungle without supporting them when you don't invest in change management training and adoption to the degree that you would need to. So that's an important takeaway here, is that change management is absolutely critical. It was certainly critical here with SAAQ, and you want to make sure you don't underestimate that human side. Training and communication is just part of that too, by the way. It's not just taking your boilerplate off the shelf generic training materials that your vendor provides you and rolling it out to your employees. You've got to tailor that for your workflows, the way you've configured the software. You've got to tailor it for your specific language and way of communicating with customers and amongst yourselves internally. And so that takes a lot of work, and that's just on the training side. Then you get into change impacts. How are people's jobs going to change? And how can I train them and educate them in advance of end user software training? How can I train them on their new processes? If I'm deploying new tools like AI or any other sort of automation that's going to disrupt a job, someone's job, what's going to happen to their job? What's that going to look like? And how can I communicate that to them and get them prepared for the change before I get to end user training shortly before go live? Because if you wait until then to start communicating changes and helping people understand their new jobs and how they're going to spend their time now that you've automated part of their jobs, if you wait until then, they're going to have their freak out moment way too late in the project. You need those freak out moments to happen early on, because they will freak out when you tell them you're going to automate their job, you're going to take away that spreadsheet, you're going to somehow rock their world in some way. They need to hear that as soon as possible, and they need to have time to work through that, and you need to have time to work through that with them. And by the way, they might have good ideas on how to make the process better that you're in the middle of designing. So the sooner you can get that feedback and reaction from employees, the better. And again, if you wait too long and wait until end user training in a classroom or online training or whatever it is, if you wait until then and they're hearing about these major changes for the first time, and I'm not talking about major change like we're implementing a new system. I'm talking about, we're going to take away your spreadsheet. We are going to force you to enter new information in the system that you don't have to enter now. Or we are going to force you to have more visibility into more processes, and you're going to analyze more data using these tools. All that is stuff that is going to have a lot of questions, a lot of concern, and you've got to work through that as early as possible in the process. And not to mention, if you really want to take advantage of technology, full advantage of technology, you can't just train people and expect that you're going to get business value. You're going to have to do the heavy lifting of changing their jobs, changing the focus of what they do, because chances are pretty high the technology is going to allow them to do more without having to hire more people. So the true way to get that value is to map out those processes and the change impacts to the people as soon as possible. So it's going to help you with training. It's going to help you with communication. It's going to help you achieve more business value. It's going to help you avoid business disruption, operational disruption at the time of go live. One of the recent metrics, or one of the metrics we've tracked over the years, including recently, is that just over 50% of organizations have a material operational disruption at the time they go live. So they can't ship product, can't close the books, can't run payroll, something major like that. They could last anywhere from a couple weeks to several months. And excuse me. So it's really important that you look at not only the cost of your direct implementation, but what's the cost on the other side? What if we don't manage risk, and what's that going to cost us if we can't ship product for a month, or we can't run payroll? What's that going to look like? And chances are pretty high you're going to be able to justify real quickly spending more time and money and resources to get it right up front. Because too often organizations aren't even thinking what happens on the other side. All they're focused on is, how do I get out of this unscathed? How do I minimize the amount of time and money I'm spending on this project right now? And how do I move on with my life and go back to running my business? It's fair enough. It's understandable why organizations think that way, but you don't want to do that in the name of rushing through things when you may have, congratulations, you may have reduced your time and cost on the implementation, but now you've just increased your long-term cost and add a huge amount of disruption and risk to the business itself. That's the worst case scenario, but that's where so many organizations end up after these projects, is because they're so focused on stopping the bleeding during implementation, because, like I said before, they had unrealistic expectations. They didn't have a realistic plan. They didn't have a complete plan. Their vendor gave them overly optimistic rose-colored glass assumptions in their plan. All those things could be part of the reason why these organizations struggle, and they tend to have issues after the fact as a result of that. So that's those are the case studies there, and I want to get now into just a few of the lessons here in just a moment. But first, I'll get to a couple questions here. Sanjay on LinkedIn says, "How do you see AI going to change the way business processes work?" And I think that's a great question that a lot of organizations haven't thought about, including organizations that are marching down the path of AI. They haven't thought through how they want AI to change their business. They're waiting for a software vendor to give them a tool that will show them what to do, but a lot of times they haven't thought through it enough to say, you know what, if we were to pick one area, here's an area of our business where agentic AI or generative AI might help us tremendously. It might add a huge amount of value to our customers, might make our employee jobs a lot easier. So let's just start there and let's figure out a way we can use AI in these areas. And the good thing about AI is it's almost like you have unlimited creativity in how you can use technology. I mean, there's so many different things you can do with AI that you could probably literally do about anything you want with AI. So you're not going to boil the ocean. You're not going to change your entire business overnight. So let's focus on the area where you could get the most value, the quickest wins, get the most ROI on the investment you might make in new technology. So that's what I think is happening with AI. Is I don't think enough people know how they want to use AI, and they're looking to vendors, whether it's ERP vendors like SAP and Oracle and Microsoft, to give them AI tools or show them AI tools, or they're turning to other third-party vendors to just see what options are out there and exploring the way those processes can change. But I think the good thing, again, with AI is it allows you to implement technology that could have a huge impact at a lower cost and lower risk than if you were to replace your entire ERP system. And we have a lot of clients now, an emerging, growing subset of clients that are saying, we're gonna punt or kick the can down the road on ERP, and we're going to focus on AI right now because we can get more immediate value. It's less risky. We don't know what's going to happen to ERP long term. We don't know, if SAP is still going to be the dominant player, if Microsoft's going to be the dominant player, or is it going to be someone else that we don't even know about yet, because the tech space is changing so quickly right now, and it's being disrupted in a way that I've never seen. And so I think the leaders, the incumbents, are going to look a lot different in a few years than they look right now. And a lot of our clients recognize that too, and they're deciding to wait and focus on lower hanging fruit, lower risk. They last thing many of them want right now is to get locked into one vendor that may or may not be relevant in 5 or 10 years from now. And that's a real risk, I would say. If you're looking at one of the big guys, one of those traditional incumbent monolithic ERP providers, you do have to ask yourself, what's the risk that they aren't the big giant gorilla anymore in the future? And what does that mean for our overall digital strategy? So you've got to factor that uncertainty, that risk, into your overall plan. And a lot of organizations are doing that by avoiding the whole idea of replacing their ERP systems altogether, which I know many of you in the ERP space may not want to hear, and it may run counter to what you're hoping happens, but that is what we're seeing with a growing number of our clients right now. So it leads to the question, well, what are the root causes of failure? We've talked a lot about these case studies. We've talked about the book. And again, if you're just joining or didn't catch it the first time or haven't scanned it yet, if you scan this QR code right here, you can pre-order my new book. You can read about it. You can see what it's about. You can look at the table of contents on there as well. So be sure to scan that and check that out. And I appreciate your support on the book too. If you could share it with people, I'm trying to get the word out to as many people as possible, which is part of why I'm doing this topic here this week. But what are the lessons then? What are the patterns we see in these failures? You have one thing we talked about, lack of clear vision and alignment. So there's no clarity around what it is we're trying to accomplish with this project. This is something that's becoming increasingly difficult for organizations because a lot of them feel like they're being forced into an upgrade or forced into a big technology change, but they don't necessarily have clarity around what it is they want to accomplish beyond just satisfying a vendor who's saying they're going to stop supporting the product going forward. So that's something you need to have a clear North Star of what it is you're trying to accomplish with the project before you go too far down the path. We talked a lot about unrealistic expectations. So assuming the jungle will be easier than you think, that's a big mistake because that leads you to a lot of bad decisions later on when you realize you don't have the time and money and resources that you thought you did, and that causes and leads to some poor decision making later on. You also have resistance to change. So people just do not like changing. Organizations don't like changing. I don't care who you are. Some organizations change a little bit easier than others, but if you are a well-established organization that's been around for a long time, for example, I'm at a client right now. It's I think third or fourth generation family owned. It's been around for 100 plus years in the Midwest United States. They manufacture stuff. They are good at changing when it comes to new products and satisfying their customers, but they are not good at changing when it comes to implementing technology. And they'll be one of the first to admit that. And most of our clients, that's true. And that's not a indictment. It's not a judgment. It's not a good or bad thing. It's just the reality is that organizations, the bigger you are, the more complex you are, the more established you are, the harder it is going to be to change, no matter how cool the technology is, no matter how well-intentioned your people seem. It's just going to be difficult. It just is. And that's okay. The key is, let's not deny reality. Let's accept reality for what it is. Let's not judge reality. That is the way it is. We're not going to change that. We aren't going to change the fact that people don't like change and organizations don't like change. So let's navigate it rather than complaining that people don't like to change or that we don't like to change. Let's just navigate the fact that it is going to be painful, but we can do things to overcome that and to help people through the change. You have vendor and integration bias. That's another root cause of failure. So vendors and integrators, they are really good at drinking the Kool-Aid. They are all double down on their product. Their product is the best thing out there since sliced bread, in their opinion. They're out there paying people to tout the same message. Their echo chamber reinforces that to them, and they will then tell you, the buying organization, that their software is awesome, no risk or low risk, not that difficult to implement. Plenty of successful client case studies, blah, 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 all the stuff that helps sell software. That echo chamber, that bias all creates a lot of problem, not only in the decision-making process, but also when you're implementing too. A lot of times we work with, when we're helping clients through their implementation on the program management side, we'll be the ones oftentimes to say, wait, why are we trying to force fit this technology into this part of the business? That might be the technology we're rolling out across the organization, but for this part of the business, it doesn't make sense. Maybe we do something different. Maybe we do a third-party bolt-on that has nothing to do with that software vendor. It's not the end of the world, although the vendor themselves will want you to use as much of their software as possible because they make more money that way. So you have to look at it from a business perspective and say, well, maybe that's not the best thing for us. Maybe there's a better option out there, and let's be objective about that. And so a vendor and integrator bias is something that's a big challenge. Weak governance and leadership is another big challenge. A lot of times organizations don't have that clear direction on how decisions are going to be made. They'll have these blanket philosophies around no customization, or we're going to use the software out of the box the way it was built. We're going to change our process to fit the software. And those blanket statements aren't super helpful. It's a good goal to set, but you're not going to achieve that in most cases. You're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to make adjustments to your plan. And the problem is organizations don't think about how we make the decision when the universal blanket philosophy needs to change for a certain exception. And if you don't have the right governance and the right framework in place, it's going to be a lot more difficult to navigate that. So governance and leadership is important. And then finally, last but not least, neglecting change management. Organizations that neglect change management, they forget that people have to adapt. They have to learn the new processes, the new way of working, the new technologies, the new job roles and responsibilities. All that stuff becomes super important as you go through these projects. Yet so many organizations don't have that clarity. They don't take the time to define what their processes are going to be, how jobs are going to change, what they want their future state to be, what they want to be when they grow up. All that stuff oftentimes doesn't materialize the way they would like or hope. So those are the takeaways, some of the takeaways from the book. Now, of course, if you read the book, you get a lot more detail than what we've talked about here today. But those are some of the big takeaways. Just a couple questions I want to get to before we wrap up here. Jeremy on LinkedIn says, great Q&A, Eric. How do you create the shared vision when there's no consensus about AI use in the organization? Any tips? Well, I think the thing with AI is it's so new and it's so uncertain, and people are still unclear as to how it could help their businesses or their jobs, that you have to pick off almost a pilot area. This is where a more agile, smaller scale approach might help, is to say, let's look at an area where we know there could be a lot of efficiency gain. Like, for example, last week I was talking to a client where customer service, they're spending a lot of time looking for information. They're spending a lot of time creating custom quotes for customers. And that's a great example of low-hanging fruit that you could not easily, but more easily deploy in an isolated fashion AI agents that allow the customer service reps to gather that information faster and provide more accurate information to customers. So let's hone in on that. It's going to have top line revenue growth. Our customers are going to be more satisfied if we do it right. Our employees are going to be happier. So we know there's a huge amount of upside potential here. We know it's not going to be easy, but we know it's something we can isolate to the customer service group without having to rip out our entire back office systems across the company. So that's where I would start. I would start small. I would start with an area in your business that has high potential, high value, and then look at where could AI help, whether it's agentic AI, whether it's generative AI, the conversational AI where you use prompts to get information. I think that's something that's widespread. You could use anywhere in your organization, but I'm thinking more about the real heavy lift around AI as far as like the agentic or the generative AI sides of it. So the good thing again is you can experiment with those technologies at a relatively low risk. It's not like an ERP implementation where if you screw it up, you're screwing up everything. You're screwing up the entire end-to-end process because you broke one part of the chain. You can still break AI. You could still completely botch the implementation, but the downside impact is probably going to be a lot less negative than some of the impact to a failed ERP project or a HR tech project or whatever the case may be. So if you isolate it to one area, start there, and then learn from it. How could we generate additional ideas from that and how we might use that same approach in other parts of the business? That's where there's a lot of value there. So thank you for that great question, Jeremy. Jiraj on YouTube says, hello, Eric, listening to your podcast for some time now. And then a follow-up question from Jiraj. We're mapping out EU insurance digital transformation niche. What would you advise as a software vendor to focus on? What do insurance companies need the most? Honestly, don't know what insurance companies need the most. I'm not an expert or a guru in the insurance industry, but I'd pull it up here just in case anyone else has any ideas for you or thoughts on what the industry might need. I would assume if I'm just speculating here, my hypothesis would be it'd be something customer service related, something with customer interaction. Maybe it's claims. Is there a way to speed up the claims process? Is there a way to use AI to sift through claims or to identify claims that might need more due diligence behind it, or more, how do you detect fraud in the claims process? Something along those lines where you could use AI to identify those sorts of things would be my guess, but open it up to any audience discussion here. Here's an interesting question that we did not get to yet. This is from Abhilash on YouTube. Abhilash says, hope you're doing well. What is the future of big ERP giants or industry move towards customized ERPs built in-house by using AI? This is a huge question. I think it's a really good one. I don't know. I think there's something here. I think you're identifying a movement that will likely happen in the industry. I think it's going to take some time for companies to get comfortable with this idea, but I do think it's something that will have merit longer term, because as organizations realize, wait a minute, I don't need to go pay all this money to get locked into a vendor who has the right to increase prices whenever they want. They have a right to do reviews or audits of my usage of the software. They might charge me more there. If I, God forbid, decide I want to move to a different software vendor someday, that's going to be a huge pain, and I'm locked in. And in some cases, the vendor is going to cut off support, or they're going to force me into a cloud situation I may or may not want, that sort of thing. So I think as organizations realize, wow, I don't have to be stiff-armed by the software vendors. I could create my own, especially if I've got parts of my business that are super niche-y or super secret sauce types processes where it's our differentiator, it's our competitive advantage, is why we are successful. Why not create an asset that you own, that you could have on your balance sheet that it adds to the value of the company? To me, that is not a terrible idea. Again, the traditional way of thinking would be, well, why would you do that? You could just use off-the-shelf software. Yeah, you could use off-the-shelf software maybe for some of your basic, more vanilla processes, but why not build your own for part of your business that's super unique, or make it harder to replicate for a competitor? If your ERP vendor provides the capabilities, or you just conform to your ERP vendor, you're conforming to average, you're conforming to the rest of the industry. And most businesses don't want, at least in the for-profit private sector, they don't want to be average. They don't want to conform to the industry. They want to be different. They want to beat their competition. They want to do better. And so why not use IT as a competitive differentiator? You look at companies like, if you look at Walmart, if you look at Netflix, Amazon, look at some of these companies that have used technology to totally change their business over the last few decades. Let's use those three examples: Walmart, Amazon. I forgot the other one I mentioned. Lyft is another one, Lyft or Uber. These companies did not grow and succeed and become unicorns in their industries by using commercial off-the-shelf software. In some cases, they might be using it in parts of their business, but they didn't do it by using SAP or Microsoft or something. They built their own software that's super hard to replicate, that gave them a unique business model, a competitive advantage. So the question is, do you have parts of your business that you could do a similar strategy, and could you use AI to help you do that faster? In the past, maybe it wasn't realistic, but now it could be, with AI helping you with coding, and you don't need as big of a development staff now as you might have needed in the past with AI. So maybe now things are different. The barrier to entry is a bit lower for companies to do this on their own if they want to. Once they do it, it becomes harder to replicate, although it can be replicated faster now than it could have in the past. But it still does potentially give you a leg up or a differentiator that others may not have. So that's a great question. And to follow up on Jeremy's questions, the follow-up to the how to start with AI, the follow-up question is, so start with one department and make a success story. And there's a follow-up comment. And yes, I do agree with that. Get a quick win, learn from it, and then start to scale it out through other parts of your business. And then you build confidence too. Once the rest of the business sees how one part of the business was successful using AI and people get excited about it, then that starts to spread. If you try to do it all at once too fast, it's going to be too confusing, too chaotic, especially with AI being relatively immature compared to other technologies. And when I say immature, I don't mean the technology necessarily. I mean people's use of the technology is relatively immature. So that's something that needs to be managed through. So that's a little bit about my book called Welcome to the Jungle, some of the lessons from that book. You can order that book by using the link below. You can order it physically. You can also order an electronic copy wherever in the world you're from. You can get access to that, so be sure to check that out. When we come back from a quick break, we'll talk more about the book, and we'll also get into our third topic of the day, our third major topic of the day, which is what smart business leaders know about AI. So we'll get to that and more after a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
How can you see into my eyes like open doors?
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown: Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy. and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 241. My name is Eric Kimberlin with Darian Chwialkowski, and we just had a discussion here, Darian, about my new book called Welcome to the Jungle. We talked about digital transformation failures, some case studies from the book, as well as lessons from those failures. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation?
Yeah, well, congratulations that your book is out. That's super exciting. And that was a great conversation. I have kind of an interesting question here. First, to start off of that conversation, what does jungle ready, if you want to pawn off the book, leadership look like?
I think jungle ready leadership is when you look around at your organization and you can see and anticipate the risks and the potential failure points. And I don't mean just, we'll fail if we can't ship product, or we'll fail if we go over budget. That is true, but I mean more specific risk, like things around, our sales group has really struggled with change in the past. They're very manual. It's a very manual part of the business. We don't really ask them to track much information now, but when we roll out this new system, it's going to affect them more than it affects other people. So therefore, the sales group in this example is going to be a bigger risk, and we need to have a change strategy that's very specific to them. So really understanding where the risks are and how we're going to mitigate those risks is really important, and having a strategy that considers them. Because if you have certain risks, it's going to add to your timeline, it's going to add to your budget, it's going to add to your resource requirements, and all that's going to affect your overall plan and budget. But if you make decisions around your plan and budget and strategy in a vacuum without having considered those things, then you are inevitably going to step on one of those landmines. So I think that's really, more than anything, what jungle ready is looking around, assessing and understanding realistically what the risks are and what your risk mitigation strategy is. And then also making sure that your team is on the same page. And when I say your team, I mean you as a leadership team, your project team, your core stakeholders, making sure that everyone fully understands what this project is. It's probably not just a technology replacement. It's probably something more than that. But what is that? What does it mean to you? And how are you going to make decisions? How are you going to declare success? What do you expect the organization to look like on the other side of this? All that stuff has to be clarified and defined up front before you get too far into the project.
Yeah, absolutely. And one more question to go off of this as well. Where is the safest pilot areas for AI today for companies when they're navigating this world of ERP and AI?
Well, okay, so safest. That's a good question. I'd say the safest is going to be where there's the most value and the least amount of negative disruption possibility. So, I mentioned the example of customer service, being an area where it's high transactions, it's high volumes of data analysis, it's high volumes of searching for information. So it's probably going to have the biggest impact or the biggest potential upside, but it's also probably going to have the least amount, a lower amount of risk, because if you screw it up, things aren't any worse than they already are if you have to go manually look up information. So, and I'm oversimplifying, of course, but there are limitations to the risk that an isolated implementation could offer. So I'd say that's where I would start is low risk, high return, and start there, and then work your way down to the other areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, super great conversation again. Congratulations on your books, or your second book, and books, your first one too. But we're going to switch gears here and get into a little bit. We're going to play a video from you in the past, speaking of AI, about AI strategies for leaders.
Now, I share a lot of content about AI on my YouTube channel and through other outlets about general strategy and tools that can be used and things of that nature, but I haven't yet talked about leadership and how executives should be leading AI initiatives. And that's what I want to dive into here today, is how should we be thinking about AI and how can we lead an AI effort from a leadership perspective? And I'm also going to touch on the strategy side of it as well. So be sure to stick around because I'm going to whiteboard one strategy that we've seen work really well with some of our clients. Now, if you'd like to learn more about AI strategy and implementation and how to make your AI initiative successful, I encourage you to download our free guide to AI strategy and implementation. It contains a number of best practices and metrics and lessons in organizations that have deployed AI and they're looking to deploy AI. So you can find that book and read it for free by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. Before I jump into the strategy and leadership that you could be pursuing for your organization, let's dive into what you should not do and where you should not start. Now, I want to give Shopify, the company Shopify, as an example here, or a use case of what not to do. Recently, shortly before filming this video, the CEO of Shopify sent out a memo to all of its employees saying, hey, guess what? We all need to be using AI. On the surface, that's okay, but he went further in saying that I need you to justify to me how you're going to be using AI in your jobs. And this was a memo sent to all employees. He also said, we're not going to be hiring any more people until you can justify why AI can't do that job to fill that role before we start to hire people from it. So in my opinion, this was a terrible way to roll out AI and a terrible way to set the tone for the potential innovation and benefits of AI, because now you're starting off in a place of fear with your organization. Now they're worried and uncertain already as it is, but now you're making that worse by saying you have to use AI, you have to figure it out. And by the way, we're thinking about how we can reduce headcount because we're not going to hire people unless we can prove that AI can't do that job. Now, it's probably highly likely that over time, AI will automate certain parts of jobs and it might reduce the need for increased headcount over time. But by setting that tone right up front early on and stating that as a mission for the AI initiative, he's creating a culture of fear and uncertainty and doubt, which is going to lead to pretty significant resistance to change and backlash, even for a tech-driven organization like Shopify. So that's what you shouldn't do. So what I want to do in the rest of this video is talk about what you should do to lead your organization through its AI strategy and other AI initiatives. So this year's Stratosphere in August, we've got an exciting agenda. On day one, it's going to be the welcome reception, a lot of networking, so it's a great way to meet some of the other peers that will be at the event. And then on day two is the full day of packed dual sessions. So there's 2 tracks happening throughout the day. You can pick which sessions you want to go to. And then on day 3, there's a half day of sessions, followed by a VIP lunch for those of you that register for the VIP passes. The first thing you can do to be successful with your AI initiative is to start small. Because I don't know about you, but when I think about AI and all the different ways it could be used within our business and within our clients' businesses, it's overwhelming. There's just so many different ways you could be using AI. There's endless and infinite possibilities on how you could be using AI within your organization. And so what you need to do is not try to boil the ocean and not try to get overwhelmed from day one, and instead start small. Start with little mini use cases of how the organization could be using AI. Now, taking this sort of a bottoms-up approach can be really powerful, but also unclear to an executive who's trying to lead an AI initiative. So let me illustrate for you what I mean by this. So at the top of the organization, you have executives and all the executive functions that go along with that. And then the typical org chart is just going to have multiple different divisions and departments and locations and work groups and all that good stuff. So these are all these different parts of your business. And rather than taking a top-down approach, what we'd say is you want to take more of a bottoms-up approach to pilot and start small. And when I say pilot and start small, what I would suggest is that you pick off people from either multiple areas, or even if you want to focus on one area of your business, find a small part of that department and let that small work group figure out how they think they could be using AI within their day-to-day work. And so you might have, hundreds or thousands of people in each of these boxes here, but you might pick off just a couple people throughout that are focused on AI and just trying to experiment essentially with AI and the tool sets that are available. And by the way, you don't need to go out and buy and procure super fancy AI technologies for this. Many of you probably already have tools you could start with. If you use Microsoft Office 365, you probably have access to Copilot, or at the very least, you probably have the option to get ChatGPT for your enterprise. So there's a lot of different tools out there that you could get for pretty low cost without a big, massive implementation, and you can let people start playing with it, not putting it into production yet, not actually using it for day-to-day work, but just testing and trying different ways of using AI within their individual business processes. So starting small is something that can make it a lot less overwhelming than looking at this entire universe of what you could be using AI for. Instead, you can start with these small little use cases. Some are going to fail, and that's okay, and you have to be comfortable with that. And some are going to succeed wildly, and some are going to be moderate successes that you may deprioritize based on the results. So the idea here, though, is that if we truly want to leverage the power of AI, we need to leverage the power of the people we have and make them part of the solution, because that will help address the change resistance and the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that comes along with AI that I mentioned earlier in this video. And it'll also give you better ideas than you as an executive might ever come up with on your own. Most executives don't know all these granular business processes and workflows. They don't fully understand how AI could be used to automate some of these business processes and workflows. So allowing your people to go through that process and figure out that stuff on their own is something that could be very powerful. And this is where we get involved with clients a lot, is we'll actually start up here and look at what the strategy is for the organization, but then we'll go down to more of an agile approach to AI and start to work with these end users and employees to help them figure out and brainstorm ways that they could be using AI to improve their business processes. So if we start small, pilot something, test things out, that's one of the first steps to a successful AI leadership effort. Now, once we've piloted and tested and innovated and tried out different things at the lower level, we're going to identify some things that worked really well. First of all, let's start with some things that aren't going to work well. We might find that a couple of these things just aren't really worth the time and effort yet. It might be something we prioritize later. But then we're going to find things that look like it could be a super big beneficial improvement to the business. And so let's just say in this case, one division or one department found a way that's a total game changer for the operations of that department. And let's just say it's something that other parts of the organization might benefit from. So in this case, now that we've proven this out, we've tested, we've defined a process, we've fine-tuned it at the small granular level, now we can start to roll it out to other parts of our business and start to scale it across the organization. Now, of course, we have to make sure we're scaling it to parts of the organization where it makes sense. If this is a finance group, for example, it might not be that they're scaling their finance AI operations to other departments. It might be that they're just scaling it throughout the organization or throughout this department here. So there's a couple different ways you could scale, but for those of you that are in a diversified organization with multiple functions supporting multiple areas, it might be that you have certain processes or AI use cases that you could use to scale across the enterprise. And then as we're going through this process here, we don't want to just scale one by one or case by case these different AI tools and processes without also moving it up the organization. And what I mean by this is if you have a business process center of excellence, this is an easy way to scale or to leverage the learnings at the lower level up to this business process center of excellence. Or if you don't have a standalone business process team or department within your organization, you could create one, even if it's a part-time role or a part-time function, or even if it's something like a company like ours at Third Stage Consulting can help with. This is a way we help our clients, is to really look at what are the success stories down here and how can we capture that as sort of a playbook for how we're going to use AI going forward. Now, once we've done this and we've captured all the success stories down here, we've even documented and captured the things that didn't work out well, or maybe they're not working out well enough to deploy right now to the rest of the organization, we want to now work from the top down. So we sort of shift from the experimental, innovation-driven use cases down here. We figure out what works, what scales, what we want to leverage across the enterprise. Now we take that up to the center of excellence so that we can define a more clear and a more deliberate strategy for AI longer term. And we take these lessons down here and we apply that. So this is where we can start to take our AI strategy, and this is the ops, the technology, the organization, everything that you would expect to see in a people process technology type of strategy, you want to start scaling down the organization. So we've taken these lessons, we've learned from it, now we've created a more clear blueprint and roadmap for how we're going to use AI longer term, and you start to drive that down the organization and be more aligned in terms of how you're rolling that out throughout the entire enterprise. Now, part of this also is going to entail a more clearly defined organizational change strategy. So this is where we start to redesign the organization. We start to look at ways that we can improve the way we're organized as a result of the fact that we have these lessons down here. Now we're taking a more strategic approach at the top level, defining what those business processes are going to look like going forward, what the organizational structure is going to look like going forward, and certainly how are we going to use AI within that going forward? And that blueprint, that sort of phase 0 of implementation planning for the broader AI initiative is something now that we can sort of flip now, start at the top and push it down throughout the entire organization. So then as we grow, we go acquire other companies, we merge with another company, we've got a clear playbook or a blueprint for what our processes and tool sets are going to look like and how we're going to be organized. Now, funny thing here, it's not just AI where you'd want to do this, it's any sort of technology initiative, but we're here talking about AI, so I'll focus on how we do that within the context of AI. So that was our video called AI Strategies for Leaders. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that video, Darian?
Yeah, I thought it would be super helpful for leaders. Obviously, you guys just listened to it, so hopefully you took something away from it. But one thing I found really interesting that you mentioned was even in tech native firms, AI initiatives and rollouts kind of can start fear within the company. So this is happening in every industry. What is the best early messaging to reduce this resistance to change that leaders can, tell their team from an early on point?
Well, I think the worst thing you can do is be unclear, or not having the answer yourselves. And we're seeing this a lot with AI, especially. We see it a lot with any technology deployment, but we're seeing it more with AI where it's such a new technology and it hasn't been well thought through or tested within organizations. So a lot of times organizations and leadership themselves don't fully understand how they're going to use AI, how it's going to affect people's jobs, what it's going to mean to people's jobs going forward. And I think that's really important because people are freaked out by AI even more than they are freaked out by other types of technology largely because there's so much hype out there around it, but also because it's there's a lot of analyst reports and news headlines that talk about all the jobs that are going to go away as a result of AI. And so there's at the very least a threat or a question around what does this mean to my job? And if the minute you come in and say, hey, guess what, guys, we're deploying AI. Okay, I can read the writing on the wall. That might mean that I don't have a job. Maybe I'm not as important to the company going forward. Maybe, it's a massive change in my job that I'm not going to fully understand. I just use ChatGPT. I don't know AI that well. How in the world am I ever going to figure out how to use this in my job? That sort of fear and uncertainty is what creates resistance. It's not because people are bad or they just don't like change necessarily, although that could be part of it. It's usually more the lack of clarity and lack of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So one last question here to go with this video and wrap up this discussion today. How do you avoid over standardizing too soon when it comes to AI within your company?
Well, I think the bigger risk is probably how do you standardize more? Because I think with AI, it's easy to not standardize just because there's so many AI tools and so many different ways you could use it in your processes and workflows. So I think the bigger question would be, how do you add a little bit of standardization, some commonality to how you're using AI, which tools you use, how you integrate it all, that sort of thing. So I think the opposite risk is the bigger one, which is now we've got a bunch of people out there using AI without any clear direction or strategy. And now our data is getting all jacked up because we have people touching the data with different AI tools and getting different answers in many cases. So I would say you don't want to over standardize, to your point, but you probably want to standardize more than would happen if you just let people go do their own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Super interesting, but yeah, a great closing to today's episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for your help, and thanks to the audience for bearing with us as we move to multiple locations throughout the podcast. I think this sets the record for the most backdrops and moves I've had to do in the middle of a podcast filming, but such is life as a consultant on the road. So thanks to everyone for listening here today. New episodes every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also see all the past episodes at that same website as well. Hope you all have a great week. In the meantime, we'll see you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.